Que pasa, everybody? Today we talk about this little thing called the political compass. But first, some review. We've already talked about what a government's purpose ought to be. There's six different functions, but the thing is that people don't agree on how that should be accomplished, right? So we have different points of view on the same issue, and we call that someone's political ideology, their beliefs that they have on how government should behave. And we also then were able to graph out or draw or organize different people's views on what we call the political spectrum. On the left, you've got your liberal points of view. On your right, you have your conservative points of view. Most people fall in the middle. You have two main political parties in this country, the Democrats and the Republicans, that are there to basically represent those two main groups. Well, today we're going to take this spectrum and we are going to add a whole new dimension to it. Or maybe I should say a whole new direction, because we're not going to be going just left and right now. Now we're going to add a vertical line, an up and down sort of spectrum. And when we do that, we're no longer talking about a spectrum. Now we're going to talk about this thing called the political compass. So what you see is that the original spectrum, if I can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. Which this is sort of the old-fashioned spectrum. I know the one we used in class is a bit more colorful and whatnot, but this is sort of the same spectrum. What you do is you basically get rid of all the labels that we had for political points of view, because when you incorporate economics into the political spectrum, what you'll see is that, if we can go back, the left side of the spectrum, again, Democrats, liberals, they typically tend to focus, not focus, I should say they prefer socialism as their main economic system, which makes sense. Democrats are people who like it when the government provides us with things like free healthcare, free schooling, welfare programs, and those are fairly socialist things. On the right hand of the spectrum, though, you've got conservatives, and conservatives typically favor capitalism. Again, Republicans, they like it when government stays out of their business, is more laissez-faire. They don't want high taxes. They don't really want the government to tell them what they can and cannot do. And so that is most represented by capitalism when you incorporate economics into it. So that's where we're going to start. If we can agree that the left side, liberals, would like socialism best and conservatives would like capitalism best, then we're on our way to creating this political compass. But there's more that we need to add here to the left and right spectrum. Like I said, we need to add an up and down axis. There it is. And so what this up and down axis is, it's called the social scale. So if left and right now is our economic point of view, now up and down is going to be a social point of view. And I'll just go ahead and explain. At the top, we have the word authoritarian, and at the bottom, we have the word libertarian. And what these two words mean, an authoritarian, you probably can infer, you already know, it's when you have a government that's very controlling. And so an example of an authoritarian government, is at least in terms of a social situation, not an economic one, you would be something like, for the government to tell us we have to wear seatbelts when we drive in our cars. That's kind of an authoritarian thing. They're forcing us to behave a certain way. You'll notice that's not a business thing. It's not an economics thing. But that is still impacting the way that we are allowed to live our lives outside of the economy. That's a social thing. Another example would be maybe like abortion, for instance. So if abortion was illegal, which in this country it's not, but if it was, that would be an authoritarian sort of policy, again, because the government would be telling somebody that they cannot do something. On the bottom of the spectrum, on the social scale, you have the word libertarian. And obviously, the root word there in libertarian is the word liberty. And so liberty, or freedom to kind of do what you want to do, is what the idea is behind libertarianism. The concept here is, again, if we let people ride on a motorcycle and we don't force them to wear a helmet, then that's a fairly libertarian policy. We leave it up to them. We don't force them to do one thing or another. We can let them choose. Some people choose yes, some people choose no. You could also say, like in some states, certain drugs are becoming legal. And so that's a libertarian sort of policy where the government, at least in those states, on the state level, is kind of backing away and saying, listen, it's up to you. There are risks, but it's up to you to decide if you want to expose yourself to this. Or cigarettes, those things are legal because it's a libertarian kind of point of view. So what we're doing here is by adding the economic point of view with the social point of view, now we don't just have one spectrum, we have a whole compass with different quadrants. And so if you've got somebody who really, really likes, let's say, they want a government who tells us what we can or cannot do in our personal lives, and they want to have a government that controls the economy, then they would fall in this upper left-hand quadrant. Okay, so you want a government where there's tons of government involvement, and the government also tells you what you can or cannot do in your social life. I'm probably just repeating myself. On this side of the spectrum, you want somebody would want a government that says like, hey, you have to be this way socially, but when it comes to business decisions economically, we're going to step out and business can do what they want to do. That would be sort of this blue upper right hand quadrant. In the bottom right, you would get it'd be kind of chaos. I mean, there'd be no control of government over businesses because that'd be a capitalist side of the spectrum, but you're also in the libertarian side of the social spectrum. So there'd be a lot of people doing whatever they wanted to do. It'd be kind of like the Purge or like crazy hippie town or something. And then over here on the bottom left, seems a little bit weird, but you'd have a lot of government involvement in the economy, providing a lot of public goods for people, a lot of regulation over businesses. But in terms of people's individual personal lives, you'd have libertarianism, so they can kind of choose to do what they want to do. I'm sorry that I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but hopefully you can either just skip that part of the video or speed it up, or you're sitting there thinking, oh, this is great, Mr. V. Thank you. Okay. Meanwhile, this is always sort of interesting. I know it's a little bit old, but we can look at where certain people tend to lay on the compass, especially as related to former presidential candidates. In 2008, which I know is not very current, you notice that Republicans, which are the red spots, typically are a bit more capitalist and a bit more authoritarian than the Democrats. So the Democrats tend to be a little less capitalist and a little more libertarian, or a little less authoritarian. But most of the time, U.S. presidents and people in general, citizens, typically are somewhere in this upper right-hand quadrant, just in case you're curious. Skip these. So where are you? This is a good question. Don't do what this is saying. This is an assignment that I would normally assign if I was in class, but rather than actually doing this, maybe you just want to think about it. If I were to ask you to draw a simple compass and place an X somewhere in a certain quadrant that represents you, I wonder where you would put that. Do you like the government to tell you what you can or cannot do? Are you authoritarian or are you libertarian? Do you want the government to tell you what you can or cannot buy, or what business you can or cannot run? Are you capitalist or are you socialist? And then mixing those together, you would kind of think through which quadrant you belong in. Anyways, okay. Well, here's the plan, everybody. Thanks for listening. I know this is kind of a long one, kind of repetitive, but I hope it makes sense at least. And you got to go back to Canvas now and see what it has you do. Thanks. See you later.